And hi, everybody. Thank you so much for watching today. My name is Aisha Jalani. I'm the founder of Pre-Law Shadowers, and today we'll be hosting a session with Colleen Bauman. I will let you introduce yourself.
My name is Colleen Bauman. I'm a partner with GoldBlatt Partners, which is a union-side labor law firm with offices in Ottawa and Toronto.
Perfect. So I guess my first question for you today is to start in the very beginning. Did you always know that law was for you? A lot of people had a very kind of unconventional way of realizing this was for them. So did you always know? How did you end up on this path?
Yeah, so, law was actually my second career. So no, I didn't always know that law was for me. I grew up in a small town in southwestern Ontario, Elmira it's called. And my background is Mennonite, which is a Protestant Christian community. And my background was sort of rural and agrarian. And so I didn't know any lawyers growing up. It never once occurred to me to think about being a lawyer when I was growing up. And when I went to university, I didn't think about being a lawyer either. I ended up working in museums, doing exhibition development and program development for some museums. So I took a fairly circuitous route to law. And it was actually, I had been doing it was through volunteer work that I decided that law was something I wanted to try. I had been doing volunteer work with refugee resettlement. And there was lots of legal issues and paperwork issues that came up in that context. And sort of through working in that context, I realized, oh, maybe this is something that I might be good at. And so it was, after I had been out working for about 5 years that I applied to go to law school. So it didn't even really occur to me before I was 29 that, law was a career that I wanted to think about pursuing.
This is exactly what I meant by unconventional pathway, where, some people say I knew since I was a kid that I wanted to be a lawyer, but it's really interesting how you still ended up on this path, despite the fact that, if you look at your childhood or your upbringing, it didn't seem like you were going to end up here. So I guess my kind of next question to you then is, you went to U of T for your undergrad, if I'm correct, like for your bachelor's. Can I ask what you majored in and why, and what that experience was like for you?
Sure. So I took a year off after high school, where I taught in Africa and spent some time traveling. And then I went to U of T, where I ended up doing a double major in fine art history and history. I loved U of T. It was a great experience. And it was, living in Toronto was a great experience too. So yeah, it was very positive, and I sort of just took courses about things I was interested in, and things I liked, but again, I didn't have any sort of really strong career focus. I was more just interested in studying those things that I was at that time interested in.
And do you remember if you joined, any extracurriculars? Were you someone that, went to do that extra mile with joining clubs and social groups and things like that while you were in your undergrad?
I worked throughout my undergrad. I worked at the U of T bookstore for all the time that I was in undergrad. And then in my final year, I had another job in a museum. My schedule was pretty full. It's like, I'm sure I can't remember anything offhand specifically that I did in terms of, I was at Victoria College, and, so I was, I participated in, social events and things there. I was a pretty studious and student, and then I was also working a lot. So.
And then my next question is, so you decided to go to University of Ottawa for law school or for your LLB. And my question to you there for that one is, did you take the LSAT for that process? I know some people, the way that they get in, sometimes you don't need the LSAT. So did you take the LSAT?
Yeah, I did the LSAT. I wrote the LSAT, I think, the week before I got married. So I remember it being a very busy time. The LSAT is sort of, some people, it suits some people's thinking style. And, like, so I don't remember, like I had like some LSAT prep books and I did some practice tests. But I always sort of found like I enjoyed the type of LSAT puzzle, logic puzzle things. So, for me, the LSAT was sort of just a step that I had to get through. But again, I think the LSAT, it only doesn't suit everyone, right? And so I personally think it's a bit of a flawed tool as a measurement of admission to law school. But yes, it was one of the hoops I had to jump through, I guess.
So I've actually heard that a lot from a lot of lawyers, or even just people who recently took the LSAT and are like law students right now, the fact that the LSAT doesn't really determine if you're going to become a good lawyer. And so therefore isn't the best tool to determine if you should get into law school or not. But it is also very dependent on the way that you think. And I think some people have to practice a lot. And
yeah, and I think it does measure certain types of sort of rational thinking and logic skills that can be useful in law, right? So there is some connection to a lot of people say when you go to law school, they sort of teach you how to think like a lawyer, and to a certain extent, it's measuring how you can put together arguments and the rational process of laying out an argument. So there is some connection between what it measures and the practice of law, but there's also many types of lawyers and there's many types of skills that are needed in the practice of law.
For sure. And then do you also remember the different components that you also had to put together for your law school application? So there's a personal statement, there is getting references from your professors. Do you remember what that process was like for you? Was it?
Yeah, I remember it being like, because I had been out of school for a number of years by then. So I remember it being a little challenging going back to because I had to, reconnect with my U of T profs and that sort of thing. Yeah, but I think also because I was approaching it as somewhat like I didn't classify as a mature, I didn't bother going in as a mature student. I just applied as a regular student. But I had been out working for a number of years, so I think I approached it sort of like like a job to be done, and putting together the application with just the best materials I could pull together to support. So.
For sure. And then your law school experience itself. The University of Ottawa is always known to be a wonderful law school. And I want to know, what was your experience in terms of both the courses that you took, but also, the networks or the connections you made? Did you again join social groups in law school as well, or any of the events they were having? What was that like overall for you?
Yeah. So I had a really positive experience at U of O. It's a terrific school. That was because at that point in my life, my life was established in Ottawa. It was actually the only law school I applied to, but I had a great education, and I know it's sort of the norm now, but at the time there was lots of they were just starting a lot of opportunities for internships and in Ottawa, of course, with the federal government and with the all sorts of other NGOs and that sort of thing. There's lots of interesting opportunities. So I did Pro Bono Students Canada. I did other internships programs that allowed me to, work with in the Department of Justice for a period as an intern. And I did an internship with the Red Cross, which allowed me to do some interesting issues in humanitarian law. So there was a lot of interesting opportunities to gain legal experience and to get exposure to different types and areas of law and different places of practice. So that was a really great aspect of it. And then there's also some really terrific profs and courses that I were able to take when I was there too.
That actually brings me to my next question was there any courses that you can remember that really stood out to you, that you were like, this was really fun for me, this is really interesting for me?
Yeah, there's clear courses that, I enjoyed taking constitutional law, and I enjoyed taking labor law, a variety of labor law courses. And and immigration law, all things that later, were areas where not in immigration law, but definitely labor and constitutional, where I ended up practicing. There's other things that, when you start law school, you don't realize are going to be at all useful to you. And then you realize, oh my gosh, that was the most useful course I ever took. And I was lucky enough to take public law with Ruth Sullivan, who's the author of Construction of Statutes. So, in terms of an expert in statutory interpretation, she is preeminent, and of course, as someone who practices labor law and practices in administrative law, it is something that statutory interpretation is something you use like every day. And you always think when you go to law school about reading cases, judge-made law, but actually, a huge portion of the law is actually statute law and legislation, and knowing how to construct an argument around the way in which a statute is written and constructed is really important. And I think, some of the skills that I learned in her class are things that I use in legal arguments, all the time. So that was, something I think where, if I would have seen the course, it was at the public law at that time was a mandatory course. So it was fortuitous that I took it, but was, such a great introduction for me to the world of statutory interpretation and understanding how important it is to administrative law.
That's really interesting. I think that a lot of lawyers now have there's always that one course that they remember really, really well because it was kind of defining later in their career. And it sounds really interesting as well. As someone who's currently like in my undergrad, it seems like something that I would probably be interested in as well. And I do like the fact that, as you experience too, you get to take different courses in law school and kind of dip your toes into different fields of law and what that would be like or what it is that you would be doing.
And if I could, the one thing I would just add, there's also courses that you sort of wish you would have taken, but you never did because you thought they would be boring. And, so one thing I never took was tax law. And sometimes I regret not taking that because tax law is an area where there are questions that come up with respect to tax implications for settlements and things like that. So, there are sometimes courses in areas where you might not think, oh, I'll never practice there, but it can still have implications for other areas of your practice.
So tax law is actually one that a lot of lawyers that I've spoken to in these sessions in the past have said that they didn't take either, and they also took. So I think it's one of those ones people maybe think that initially might be boring, but it probably does have a lot of useful, it would be really helpful later in their life or in their career. And just because there's so many different courses that you get to take in different fields of law that you get to explore in law school, is there a specific field or a specific type of lawyer you knew you wanted to be when you first started law school? And has that changed to what you have practiced now?
Yeah. So, I didn't know exactly what area of law. I think I probably went into law school thinking I wanted to practice immigration law, and I didn't end up practicing immigration law, but I definitely knew that I was interested in sort of the human interaction side of law. And that I was interested in doing something that was, consistent with my values, would promote social justice, and that would help people. So when I was studying, but I think at the same time, it's really, going into law school, you don't know what there's such a vast array of what people can do with a law degree. And I think, many people don't realize how many multifaceted law can be. So I think it's also important to, approach it with an open mind and, take courses that sound interesting or explore different areas to see what might be a good fit. And so, I definitely didn't go in thinking I wanted to do labor law. I was interested in labor law, and I took labor law because, I always knew that it's also a good place in which to practice human rights law, administrative law, and that it was also a place, where there was an opportunity to further social justice issues and values. So I was interested in it and I took it, but it wasn't like, oh, I definitely want to do this. And I was also like, I was interested in, like, I really enjoyed and found interesting criminal law and family law, but I also knew that in terms of the as a practice area, I personally would have found, I think, family law very challenging, given, the tremendous stress that families are under at times of conflict when they are needing legal assistance. And I ended up clerking. I didn't end up articling. So even when I was in my clerking year and thinking, oh, where do I want to end up working? There was sort of a handful of places where I was thinking, oh, I would consider working, or this would be a fit for me. And GoldBlatt Partners was at the top of my list because of the values of the firm, because of the type of work that they were doing. And it would just seem to be a really good fit for me and the type of practice that I wanted to have.
So you mentioned you were clerking first for a year. Can we know more about that experience? Like, who were you clerking for, and what was that like for you?
Sure. So I clerked. So I actually, it just was sort of through a number of fortuitous events that I ended up in. For my summering year, after second year, I ended up doing just a short 4-month clerkship, or filling in for someone who had to leave their clerkship early at the Superior Court here in Ottawa. That was a great experience because working at the Superior Court, you see all types of legal issues and all types of law. It's very, the judges are so busy, and they have very sort of, fast focused research type of requests that they needed assistance with. So I did that just for the one summer. And then for my articling year, I clerked for Justice Abella at the Supreme Court of Canada. And I think that was also, that was a time when BC Health Services was being heard, which is a seminal case in 2D, the freedom of association rights under the Charter. So I think that also served, and Justice Abella herself has a great deal of labor expertise. So that experience also served to sort of cement my interest in labor law as an area that I wanted to pursue. And it was just such a great opportunity to, you see both working with your judge, but also just working with the other group of clerks, this great group of really smart, keen people in which you get to talk about all these interesting legal cases with. It was a really positive experience and positive year.
I have to say, it sounds like an amazing opportunity. I actually was wanting to bring it up, so I'm really glad that you mentioned it. Just because it seems like it would be very rewarding, especially at that point, or when you were doing it the summer after your second year. At that point, none of the students are really likely to end up at the Superior Court, and the fact that you were there and you got to experience so much while you were there, and to be working under a justice as well, was what it must have been an amazing experience for you. And like you said, you got to learn about lots of different types of cases. And then I also read that you're kind of leading your firm, so GoldBlatt Partners, you are leading their Supreme Court agency practice. I think that's what it's called. Could you let us know more about what that is and what it is you do while you are part of that?
That's sort of a small part of my practice, but that appearing at the Supreme Court, for many lawyers, it's not something that they're going to do regularly. Some lawyers, it is something they'll do regularly, but not everyone. And so there is a practice of using agents at the Supreme Court to provide both procedural and strategic advice. And so you're really basically, as an agent, you're assisting counsel who are appearing before the court. And it's also a good way to keep plugged into the jurisprudence and what's happening at the court. So I do that, but then I also have, my own appellate practice, which includes, cases in which we've either brought to the Supreme Court or where we've appeared as interveners at the Supreme Court. And that's always really great experience as well, because the cases that get leave at the Supreme Court are those that are dealing with, some of the most complex legal issues that are, facing us at this time. So that leads to a lot of interesting cases and interesting possibilities if you are intervening. So as an intervener, you usually have a limited role where you're going to, on behalf of whatever organization that has perspective, to put forward in a key case, you are going to be able to put together a factum to argue your client's position or and to supplement the submissions that are already before the court. And you also usually get, right now it's like only 5 minutes of oral argument as an intervener, but it's it's an exciting process to be part of, to see the court active and to see how this case law evolves in these areas. And as I was mentioning, for labor lawyers, the past decade has been a really exciting time because we've seen a real evolution of the court's jurisprudence around Section 2D of the Charter and the freedom of association rights, with sort of culminating with the court's new trilogy in the MPAO, the Mounted Police Associations of Ontario case, and this is SFL, which is the Saskatchewan Federation of Labor case, where you saw them recognize the right to strike as a constitutionally protected part of 2D. So it has been, being involved in these cases and seeing the evolution and change in the jurisprudence has been a really, exciting thing to be involved with.
It sounds very exciting just hearing you speak about it. And I can see the way that you're explaining it, that you are very passionate about what you do as well. And so this is kind of what you do when you're working at the Supreme Court or when you're at the appellate as the Supreme Court. But I know you also have a bunch of practice areas that you do at the firm in general, or maybe in the lower courts as well. I was reading about it on your website, but I'm going to have you kind of list them instead.
Sure.
It is really impressive how, I know they're all linked in a way. I can see that, the constitutional and the human rights and the labor law, for example. But if you could just explain, for someone that didn't know at all, what it is that you do at your firm.
Yeah, so I have a mixed practice, but bread and butter is labor work. So that includes grievance arbitrations. So for unionized employees who have a collective agreement, if an individual member of the union or the bargaining unit grieves under the collective agreement, there's a grievance process that can result in an arbitration. And it's less formal than a court process, but also more expeditious than a court process. So I will often be counsel to the union in those cases when they are pursuing grievances on behalf of their members. And it's also in those cases that often human rights in the workplace issues arise. They could be cases, for example, dealing with harassment at the workplace, or cases dealing with the denial of benefits. There's a large array of different types of issues around how the contract is to be interpreted with respect to the rights and benefits that members have under it. And alongside that, I also do a fair bit of bargaining on behalf of unions and interest arbitration work. So the bargaining, and when I got into law, I thought, I'm going to be much more interested in sort of the individual cases, but I really found that I really enjoy the bargaining. I enjoy the strategic part of that, about negotiating and finding solutions that can affect tens of thousands of members, depending on the size of the bargaining unit and the union, and make a real difference in people's lives by negotiating improvements to their pay and benefits. So that's another part. And as part of that, for groups that are on an interest arbitration route rather than a strike route. So, for some groups, the strike is the dispute resolution mechanism, but for other bargaining units, for example, those in the healthcare sector, those will be resolved by interest arbitration, which is, another sort of interesting legal process that is about resolving disputes around the contents of a collective agreement. So that's another part. And then I also have a fair size administrative law practice, which includes doing judicial reviews. And largely that's at the federal court or the Federal Court of Appeal, given my location in Ottawa. And appellate cases. And then there's just other interesting administrative law or other interesting cases that come along. Right now, our firm, we're acting for the Office of the Privacy of Commissioner of Canada it's in an appeal that was brought to a reference question that they had brought to federal court regarding whether or not the Privacy Act applied to Google as a search engine. And the federal court answered that question saying, yes, Google does apply. I mean, the Privacy Act does apply to Google as a search engine when it is operating as a search engine. And Google is now appealing that to the Federal Court of Appeal. So that's sort of an example of the range of types of issues. It's not only sort of traditional labor law cases, but there's also a number of sort of interesting administrative, broader administrative law files that come across our desk.
I'm honestly speechless. I'm very interested in everything that you're saying. And thank you for giving us examples of what types of cases, because some people watching might not know what administrative law exactly entails or what labor law exactly entails. So I really appreciate you giving us some examples. I have a really kind of random, but just more of a curiosity question for you. It wasn't really part of my list. But, you mentioned that, with the healthcare sector, you also have disputes with them where they wouldn't really they wouldn't opt for the strike option as the dispute resolution. With the rise of COVID and also with the impact that COVID had on hospitals and the healthcare sector itself, have you been seeing either at your firm or in general also a rise in disputes within the healthcare sector or within unions and kind of labor law in that area?
There has been a whole body of case law that has arisen around COVID issues in the workplace. I mean, as you can imagine, COVID has changed so much about the way that we do our work, and it also has created all sorts of new issues. We also act for professors at a number of faculty associations, and things like hybrid teaching online and in person, health issues around being in person, or issues around vaccinations, and those who did not want to be vaccinated, and what are their rights, and what about religious exemptions, and what about other health exemptions. There have been countless issues, and in the health sector and beyond, that have arisen as a result of COVID and how that intersects with people's lives in the workplace. So I think there's a lot of interesting case law that has arisen out of that. It is very fluid and constantly changing, just as COVID, the situation around COVID is fluid and constantly changing. And so what is reasonable and necessary at this time, at one time, might not be the case, 5 months down the road. So it has meant to be, you have to be flexible and adaptable. At the same time as the reality is that nothing's going to be heard tomorrow. There's always going to be some time lag. And so, what is the problem of today may very well have evolved when the case is being heard, months later. But yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, but of course the healthcare sector has very unique concerns. And one of the big challenges in the healthcare sector, this is another case that I think you might find interesting, is that we're involved in right now. So right now in the healthcare sector, of course, there's massive retention issues, partly driven. I think we're pre-existing, but also partly driven by the strains that have been added by COVID. And at the same time, the government of Ontario introduced in 2019 a bill number. It's Bill 124, but it was an act that restricted wage increases in the broader public sector to 1% a year. And there is a constitutional challenge that my firm is involved with. We act on behalf of the Ontario Federation of Labor, but a number of other unions, including the nurses and all the teachers unions, have also brought challenges to this legislation. And I bring it up in the context of the healthcare sector question because it's sort of a perfect storm. At the same time as you have COVID and you have all of the type of challenges and risks that we were expecting healthcare workers to take by being on the front line constantly, and the number of hours and the additional work that they had to do and the strain and stress that put on them, we were capping the wages at 1% a year increases at the same time as there's a period of super high inflation now, so that I think that poses a big challenge to adequately remunerating healthcare workers for the work that they are doing in the context of COVID right now. Yeah, and so that's a constitutional challenge that will proceed. There's a hearing scheduled in September.
Thank you so much for answering my question, for also giving me some examples of what is happening. I know that COVID has impacted, well, on every area of life, in the area of law and kind of challenging some kind of legal cases and things like that. I know would have had a major impact, as you said. I did hear about the wage capping situation, and I think that, I hope that resolves in the way that it should, without saying exactly what my opinions are, but at the same time I am. I just think that, like you said, it's a perfect storm. There's a lot that happened all at once that no one could predict. And there is a lot of stress that a lot of different labor unions or labor organizations are under. Teachers and healthcare sector within nurses and doctors have been affected the most with that, with added stress and added pressure, same with professors. So I do hope that that does work out, and I will be interested in kind of, keeping up with this case as it kind of progresses along. So thank you so much for answering that. And then my next question is to go back into my list of questions that we had is, what is one misconception about, I guess, lawyers, or even just, no, I'll just stick to lawyers for now. But what was one misconception that you've heard about lawyers the most that you really want to address?
Oh, I mean, I guess, the common thing that you hear about lawyers is that they're, and I think it's sort of driven by, depictions in the media we see of the greedy corporate lawyer sort of thing, is that lawyers are only interested in money, or that that people get into this profession for, just for remuneration reasons. And that, in my experience, that has not at all been the case. Everyone I know who has gotten into law is doing it because they're passionate about the law, they're passionate about justice, they're passionate about helping people. They see the law as a tool for social change. They see the law as a way of protecting the vulnerable, asserting rights. So I think, the people that I work with are at my firm are, really dedicated professionals that are interested in, defending the rights of working people, and finding ways to assert and their rights and improve their conditions. And I think they're all in it for the right reasons. And it's important, one of the things I think that drives people from law is that they don't feel that they believe in what they're doing, or they don't feel that they're working in a supportive environment. So I think it's really important that when, you are looking for a law firm where you want to practice and build your career, that you find, a firm that is consistent with your values, and where there's, people that you trust, and that they have your back and you have their back, and that you're sort of working together towards a greater cause. It's like lawyers are hired to do the cases that come to them. So there's not every case that you do is going to be a case that you love, or that you think, oh, this is just the most interesting case, or that this is the cause that I believe in the most. And sometimes you're doing the case and you're just doing the best that you can on behalf of your client. But I think overall you want a sense that you believe in the work that you're doing. So it's important that you are practicing with others who share those values.
I think given the fact that law is, it is a lengthy commitment to have the education wise, and then, putting in that work and putting in that time and effort and your energy into studying it and going through the bar and all that thing. I think it is important to make sure that you're actually passionate about what it is that you're doing, and that you enjoy what you're doing. And of course, if you have a supportive environment and a good law firm that you're working at with people around you, like you said, that are helping them, that must make like an immense difference to how you feel about your job. And that is a misconception that we always hear, that lawyers are greedy. We also always hear that lawyers are like, you have to be very specific type of personality. So like a tough, like cutthroat, you can't be emotional. A lot of women always hear this, and I've heard this before too, that because I'm emotional, I won't be a good lawyer. But I think that, you can also address this, but I think that after speaking to so many lawyers, I'm learning that there's not one person, there's some certain personality traits or skill set that I think would help if you were, trying to be a successful lawyer. But because there's so many different fields, I guess if you were someone who was more empathetic, you would do really well in family law because you'd able to connect with your clients and their issues, for example.
But I mean, I would say that even within the same practice or firm, you need people with different skills, right? You need, for certain files, you might want someone who's like a bulldog on that file, right? But other times you need someone with a different litigation approach and a different style. You need people that have management skills and people skills. You need people with number skills. You really need to cover, given the range of issues that come up in a legal practice, building a firm and having people with a variety of skill sets. And that's why it's also, I think, it's great that law is people's second degree, and people often bring a wide range of different pre-law degrees to that. That's actually a great thing, because you have people with diverse backgrounds and interests and diverse skill sets, and I think that's a real asset. There is not one sort of one size fits all or one mold in terms of the practice of law.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for also addressing that misconception as well. And then my next question to you is just, how do you balance, your career? You have a very successful career, and I'm sure you have a lot going on every day, considering you're working in different practices of law as well. But how do you balance that with your personal life? So with things like family and just time for yourself?
Yeah, so I think that's that's always a challenge, but I think there's a couple things. So I'm married and I have 3 kids, and they're ages 9 and 12, so they're still on the younger end of things, although they can do more for themselves now than when they were really young. And it's busy, like it's really busy. There's no question. I work at a firm that values family. They value, making time for your family. They have a great mat leave and parental leave policy. So there's I think there's support there for achieving a balance, but there's also lots that I think you can have a supportive firm, but it's also what you as an individual do to try and create balance in your practice. And there'll be times when you have more balance and times when you have a little less balance. And so I think, being deliberate about not, sometimes not working. Sometimes you may have to do some work on the weekend, but also carving out that time where you're not working, and being deliberate about that, making sure you're, scheduling your vacations and carving out time in the evening to be together with your family. All of that is I think really key. And just finding where you can, fit things into the time that you do have, so I find often I like that, 6 to 7 in the morning hour, just to do a lot of emailing and things like that. For me, that's like a time that I can carve out before my kids are all up in the hustle and bustle of the day, just to clear my plate of a few simple things. And then I can focus on my kids, for that time for 7 to 8:30 to make sure everyone's out the door and everyone's getting off to a good start. So, you sort of find the tricks that work for you. One of the realities of the practice of law, though, is that it's client driven, and that people come to lawyers when they have major legal problems. And often those problems are of a legal nature. And I'm talking about the private practice of law. I think it's a little different for if you're in-house counsel. And that comes with time constraints. So there may be, a client, we represent many large unions, and for example, there's a strike and there's an injunction application, that all that happens in a very short time frame, and you need to be there, you need to be able to do it. So part of it is, jumping in and doing it when you need to, but when you have breathing space, making sure that you take that breathing space. But I think there's a constant tug and pull in that area.
It's always something I love to ask people. I'd love to ask if, at this point in your career, do you have time for yourself, or are you able to? Because I think that's been a lot of people are concerned about, a lot of pre-law students are concerned about, like, am I going to have time for the other things that I also want to do in my personal life, like starting a family or whatever else it might be. So it's nice to know that, there is, I think naturally you do find some ways to make it work in whatever, like you said, whatever breathing space that you do have. And then there's going to be some weeks where you won't have as much time to give. But I think that balance is something that everybody craves in every career. And I guess with law, it's just hard to find that sweet spot, and maybe not every single time you'll find it. I do see that the time is 1:53. So I just have one last question for you. And that is, if you could go back in time and let's imagine that you're, let's say the age that you were right before you started law school. Actually, I want to take it even younger. I'm going to say, let's say that you were 20. If you could have your 20-year-old self in front of you right now, what is one piece of advice you think that she needs to hear from you, from future you?
Oh, that's hard. I don't actually know exactly what I would tell 20. Like, I don't really have any like regrets, or I should have, I should have done law earlier, or I should have done. I think one of the things I think, like relative to the practice of law, is talk to as many people as you can about that, so contacts that you have, to find out about different areas of practice, find out, and like exactly what you're doing here. You're talking to different lawyers from different areas, find out about what their practice is like and how they got into law. There's it's such a diverse profession that I think is really important to not go to law school with only one idea in mind, or go on, I want to be, if you want to be on a Bay Street firm, that's great, but there's lots of other options. And to, go in with an open mind, both about what you're going to be studying and in terms of, what you can do with your law degree, or what you want to do with the law degree. I'd encourage people to think about talking to people as much as possible, and also, taking those experiences where you can get a practical experience, either through internships or through jobs, or, different programs that are out there, Pro Bono Students Canada and others, take advantage of those opportunities to give you exposure to the range of different types of legal practices available.
For sure. I love asking that question as well, just because it does take you back, and you do have to think. Some people said they have, like you said, no regrets. Like, there's nothing I would have told her not to do. And some people said I would tell her to just continue what she's doing because she's going to do great and everything. I just think it's a nice way for you to kind of look back at everything that you have accomplished, and how 20-year-old you had no idea what was about to come, didn't even know that law was the path that you were going to end up on. I think this is also a really nice way to kind of end off, because the advice that you just gave, we're also taking for ourselves, because I'm 20 right now. A lot of us that are on our team and a lot of people that are watching are in their early 20s, still in their undergrad, still trying to figure out if law is for them. So I definitely second the advice of talking to lawyers. It's the only way that I have felt more reassured in my decision, and the only way that I feel more excited and passionate about, this is what I would like to practice in, or this is what I would like to do moving forward in my life. So thank you for that advice as well. Is there anything else that you want to add, or you want to say before I kind of wrap this up?
No, just thanks so much, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you so much. All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We're going to go ahead and end the recording. And if you guys have any questions for us, you can always email us. Colleen, I just want to ask you, would you feel comfortable if students had any further questions where they didn't think it was addressed? Are they able to email you or reach out?
Sure, for sure. Feel free to reach out. And, for people down the road, if you're interested in labor law and union side labor law, we're always interested in keen students for both summer positions and articling positions, and think about labor law as an option and think about taking it at law school too.
For sure. Thank you so much for that. All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye now.